Chapter 10. I leave Staten Island and immediately get a job back on Staten Island. When I graduated college, I joined the 67% of graduating seniors in America who didn't have a job. My first instinct? What if I created a TV show about college? Then I wouldn't have to leave. So fellow Lampoon writers Simon Rich and I came up with an idea for a hidden camera show called Admissions Impossible, which would involve us posing as alumni interviewers or college admissions officers in order to trick high school students into saying awful things during their interviews. This is the description of the show that we wrote in 2004, which I just found on my laptop because, in a digital age, nothing ever disappears except hope that things will disappear. Admissions Impossible exploits high school seniors at their most vulnerable. We set up fake college interviews under the guise of real, ultra-competitive universities. Instead of chatting with alumni, students will meet actors posing as university representatives. This is a prime opportunity to screw with these kids. Man, we were monsters. But also, not a terrible idea for a show. My agent is still reading this book. Maybe we should talk about it? Sadly, no one wanted to buy it. And by no one, I mean the one manager who cold called the Lampoon and told us to pitch me ideas. That manager was a man named Trevor Ingleson, who later married Meghan Markle before Prince Harry did. What a world. So with no prospects and no skills, again, I majored in the history and literature of Russia and Britain, I got ahead of the millennial curve and moved back to my parents' house and into my childhood bedroom, which, if you haven't done it, is one of the most humiliating experiences as an adult can go through. At first you think, no big deal, it's like I'm back in high school, except no curfew and I can drink in front of my parents. Then you have one drink in front of your parents in your childhood kitchen and you're like, I'm the saddest boy on earth. There's something about moving back home after college that eliminates all the respect you accumulated by going away to college. All the bragging your parents did about going to a good school disappears overnight. You live in their house, yet they dare not speak your name in public for fear that a friend of theirs with a working child will ask, and what is Colin doing now? So you slink around and try to eat alone at odd hours, and then go to a movie at 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday with your one other loser friend who moved back home. Then you go to a diner at 2 a.m. and see your high school girlfriend, and she's already married with 3 kids, and you don't even understand how that's physically possible, or why she's at a diner at 2 a.m. with 3 kids at home. So you ask the diner to make your plate of eggs to go to escape the whole scene, and now you're eating cold eggs in the basement of your house at 3 a.m., watching Howard Stern tell a porn star to kiss Gary the retard because that's easily the most thrilling moment of your day. And pretty soon you're thinking, why the fuck did I major in the history and literature of Russia and Britain? After a few weeks of extreme depression, I talked to a couple of friends from college who were equally miserable and unemployed, and we all decided, let's move to Manhattan or Brooklyn or wherever we can get an apartment and just force ourselves to get jobs and become actual adults. And my parents were like, no, don't, and then closed the door behind me and locked it. There were 7 of us sharing 2 apartments on 20th Street and Avenue C in the development known as Stuyvesant Town, which was later part of a class action lawsuit because they charged us full price for an apartment that they were claiming was low-income housing. In our case, that description was accurate. The most successful of us, Gina, was a waitress in an Irish bar down the street. Her boyfriend and my best friend, Chris, was getting paid to participate in scientific sleep studies, where you couldn't sleep more than 15 minutes for a period of 5 days, which might violate the rules of the Geneva Convention. I was living off my winnings from appearing on the game show The Weakest Link. Unfortunately, I was really bad at The Weakest Link, so my prize was only $6,000. I'm net of $3,000 after California taxes, which has to be a record for the least a winner has ever won. In Manhattan, that was 2 months' rent. So, a week after I finally escaped Staten Island and moved to the city, I accepted a job at a local newspaper, back on Staten Island. Why? Because I had 0 other job prospects. Because I majored in the history and literature of Russia and Britain. The only reason I even got offered the newspaper job was because I had interned at the paper for 2 summers in high school and wrote articles for the teen section, such as my glowing review of Bernadette Piener's In Annie Get Your Gun on Broadway, and an essay imploring teens to admire the classics with lines like, while teens should hardly abandon modern trends, they should also recognize the classics in art, music, and literature. Wow, great insight, Colin. Also, any time a teenager refers to his own peers as teens or uses the phrase modern trends, he deserves to get punched. So, right on brand. This all makes more sense once you see my official teen correspondent press photo. This is also the photo I use on Tinder to attract lesbians over 50. That job as a teen reporter led me to become editor-in-chief of my high school newspaper, The Owl, where we published more issues of the paper than any other regime in years, thanks to hard-hitting breaking news like, Peter Young eats 5 Big Macs. That led me to join the Harvard Crimson's editorial board, where I wrote such memorable articles as Habitat for Humanity offers up free ice cream, and pointed op-eds like, the Army shouldn't switch from regular caps to berets. Not sure why that was an issue, but I was adamant that it not happen. From the article, not only is this change ineffective and practical, but it's also insane. They've looked for a solution and come up with berets. I'm still hoping that they haven't realized what berets actually look like. I guess I really hated berets. Anyway, I had a quote-unquote background in journalism, as much as anyone can have at the age of 21, but I never expected to bring that background into the foreground. See what I did there? Can't stop being a news anchor. The paper I worked at, the Staten Island Advance, was actually an amazing newspaper with incredibly talented reporters and editors. And at the time, it had a circulation of 100,000, which was roughly 1 out of every 5 people on Staten Island. It was also the first publication ever owned by Samuel Irving Newhouse Jr., who became one of the richest men in America by acquiring dozens of newspapers in the entire Condé Nast magazine empire. He is the second richest Staten Islander of all time, behind one of the richest humans in history, Cornelius Vanderbilt, who built a shipping empire with ferries along the New York harbor and, adjusted for inflation, was richer than Bill Gates and Warren Buffett combined. But it all started on Staten Island, and his corporation is still called Advance Publications after his very first paper. That's why he received the greatest honor a Staten Islander can receive. He has a ferry boat named after him, which is the Staten Island equivalent of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The job itself was fantastic. I was a night editor, which meant I did whatever random stuff hadn't been done before the paper went to press. Rewriting articles, designing the layout for each section, proofreading every page, and my favorite task, writing headlines. The Advance took a conservative approach to headlines, whereas I came from more of a New York Post tradition. If they wrote teenager stabbed in heroin bust, I would suggest angel top chopped up and smack down. It usually ended up a lot closer to their version than mine. I also had to write stories from scratch if they came in overnight. And occasionally, I got sent out in the field as a crime reporter to cover breaking news in the gritty streets of Shaolin. One story I remember was a multi-car accident where I arrived on the scene just after the paramedics. Luckily, no humans were injured in the crash, so the paramedics began resuscitating a raccoon that had gotten hit by a truck. If you think our health care system is broken, just wait until you see a raccoon getting CPR. This being Staten Island, the story made the front page. As you can see, it was far more important than the story below it. Island priest pleads guilty in sex abuse case, because that story didn't have an adorable picture of a raccoon getting carried away on a stretcher. I'll let you have a moment of feeling warm and fuzzy before I tell you what happened next. The raccoon bit the paramedic's eyes out. Kidding. What really happened was they turned the raccoon over to animal control, and it was immediately euthanized. Apparently, that was the city's policy. Take a raccoon, kill a raccoon. The paramedics understandably like, what the fuck? We just saved that raccoon's life. And that led to a second front page story the next day about the outrage over raccoon euthanasia on Staten Island, which of course led to my first Pulitzer Prize. I'm sorry, but I couldn't stop my fingers from typing it. The weirdness of local news on Staten Island was one reason I loved the job. Plus, I learned a ton from the senior editors who went on to prestigious jobs at the Star-Ledger, the Times, and of course, the New York Post. And shockingly, my job at the Advance had an incredible healthcare plan. Full vision and dental, things that no working American would ever expect. I thought about getting an extra set of teeth made and keeping them in a drawer until I was 80. The downside of the job was that my shift went from 11 p.m. to 8 a.m., plus an hour and a half commute each way. So I'd be having dinner with my friends and then get up from the table at 9 p.m. and say, time to go to work. Then I'd walk in a mile into an express bus that took me to a local bus in Staten Island, which dropped me half a mile from the newspaper. And when I left work at 8 a.m. every morning, I was in full New York City rush hour traffic back into Manhattan. So while other people were having coffee and waking up, I was watching the sunrise from the bus window and slowly losing my mind. I barely slept for the 5 months I worked there, and I had headaches all day. Turns out that going to bed at 10 and waking up at 10 a.m. and waking up at 2 p.m. is not a healthy night's sleep. It's an extended nap full of daymares. Of course, the larger problem was that I wanted to be in comedy, not journalism. I knew this because I spent every free moment at work compiling news stories I could use for stand-up instead. Like when police arrested a man for disorderly conduct, and the man's name was Jihad Williams. So his first name was basically the definition of disorderly conduct. Or when a guy was accused of attempted murder and his nickname was Murder Mike. Pretty hard to beat a murder charge when people refer to you as murder. The worst part was he tried to shoot someone but missed on all 6 shots. So Murder Mike was actually really bad at murder. Once I saved up enough money to pay 2 months' rent and enough health care to buy a second set of eyeballs just in case, I quit the newspaper and decided to put everything I had into getting a job in comedy. And I don't want to brag, but since I left that newspaper, all newspapers have plummeted in circulation. You might say, yeah, you idiot, that's because of the internet. But I like to think it's because the Staten Island's Advance lost its swag.